Welcome, everybody. I think we'll start. We know that autistic people are hugely underemployed, and we know the impact of this on the quality of life and mental health of people on the spectrum. So it's really important that we understand and address the barriers that prevent autistic people getting into work. And I really hope that today's presentations, which are good examples of research impacting practice, that they help to inspire more inclusive practices across Australia. Aspect's Research Centre for Autism Practice, or ARCAP, prioritises exactly this kind of research, the sorts of stuff that aims to make a difference in the day-to-day lives of autistic people. The agenda today is we have two presentations. The first presentation, ARCAP Executive Manager Vicki Gibbs and Detective Acting Sergeant Rowell will present a research study investigating neurodivergence within the Australian Federal Police. They'll also look at attitudes of staff in the workplace and experiences of current AFP staff who identify as neurodivergent. In our second presentation, we have Professor Adam Guastella, who will discuss the Switched On program, an employment support program for the employer and for the autistic job seeker. Adam will discuss research findings showing the impact of attitudes and stigma on the workplace, as well as talking about creating more inclusive workplaces. And then we'll finish up, hopefully with enough time for some live questions and answers from our presenters. Our first presenter is Vicki Gibbs. Vicki is the National Manager in ARCAP and is currently completing a PhD investigating victimization experiences of autistic adults. Vicki has also co-authored research about the intersection between autism and the criminal justice system in Australia. Detective Acting Sergeant Rowell from the Australian Federal Police is our second presenter, working with Vicki. In 2019, Lauren commenced a passion project on behalf of the AFP, researching the concept of neurodiversity and reflecting how the AFP can benefit from the recognition of neurodiversity and supporting all AFP members. And then finally, we have Professor Adam Guastella, who holds positions at Sydney Children's Hospital at Westmead and the Brain and Mind Research Centre. His work is incredibly varied and hard to fit on one slide, but aims to build collaborative partnerships between researchers, clinicians, and services to ensure that autistic people receive the best available assessments and treatments that support their well-being. And now we'll begin with today's presentations. Our live Q&A with the presenters will begin in about 45 minutes. So take it away. We'll hear from Vicki.
The AFP Neurodiversity Project was a collaboration between Autism Spectrum Australia and the Australian Federal Police. The project team consisted of myself, Abby Love and Regan Kai from Aspect, and Detective Acting Sergeant Rowell from the AFP. So in today's presentation, Lauren will take you through the project background, and then I'll present the research methods and the results of our research. And then I'll hand back to Lauren, who will take you through the opportunities that we see for the AFP going forward on the basis of the results of the study.
The AFP Neurodiversity Project started in 2019 when I attended an International Women's Day conference, and I heard Dr. Catherine Ball speaking about neurodiversity and women in drone technology. I didn't know what neurodiversity was, but I knew that women in drone technology was cutting edge and innovative. So I listened a little more. She said that neurodiversity was a missed opportunity by a lot of organisations, and that neurodivergent people brought a lot of unique strengths and talents and innovation and problem-solving skills to organisations. So I thought those were all things that AFP could really use in the work that we do. So I went back to work and had a look at what we do, and I didn't find a lot. So it signalled to me an opportunity to commence my own research project, and like a good detective, to do all the research, gather all the evidence, and come together with a package to provide our executives. So that's pretty much where this project started. I also, when I was a child, I grew up with a family member that I believe now to be on the autism spectrum, and they've gone on to have children that have been diagnosed with autism. So throughout my life, I've witnessed what it's like for someone in a world not built for them to be excluded, to be treated poorly because they're a bit different. And I saw that reflecting on my career with the AFP, which has been nearly 19 years now, is that we have members in the AFP who also are quite different and think differently. And I really want to make those improvements. So there's a lot of reasons why I started this project. So the Australian Federal Police, the AFP sits within the Home Affairs portfolio. Our main role is in Commonwealth criminal law enforcement. However, we also do a whole range of other things as well, including providing community policing services to the ACT and some of our other territories. We investigate all different crime types, and including terrorism, proceeds of crime, human trafficking, the works. And we also have an outcome 3, which is a protection and aviation wing of the AFP. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So AFP core functions providing policing services, as I've said, but we also assist international partners with developing their policing services and methodologies through training and support. We have offshore peacekeeping missions, and through the protection, as I mentioned, we protect Commonwealth infrastructure interests and a lot of high office holders and dignitaries. The roles in the AFP can be broken into 2 broad categories. There are sworn roles, which are your traditional police with police powers, and in that hat also sits our protective service officers who provide support at airports through aviation and other protection roles at our infrastructures like Parliament House, for example. We have specialist tactical, technical and support roles as well. So think those really cool Gucci areas like our SWAT teams. Unsworn roles is the other side of the house, and that's our corporate support. So our staff work in human resources, medical, psych services, training. We have intel analysts, we have criminal assets confiscation. Forensics is a large portfolio offering crime scenes and other forensic science work, and legal services as well. The AFP Neurodiversity Project. So as I said, it started in 2019, and it took me a little while due to COVID to keep agitating for change, and there was a lot of support at the time. And I put in a proposal to receive funding through the AFP Innovation Fund, and in early 2021 was successful. Commissioner Reece Kershaw selected our neurodiversity project for improving AFP knowledge through research. And we were successful out of 104 applications and one of 18 to receive the funding. The funding enabled the partnership with Aspect Research for the development and conduct of the AFP Neurodiversity Survey and Research Project.
So the aims of the research were to investigate the current level of neurodiversity within the AFP, to explore attitudes towards working with autistic people amongst AFP staff, and to gather information from current autistic AFP staff about their experiences of recruitment, onboarding and working at the AFP, and their perspectives as to how the AFP might better support autistic staff. The research questions that guided the study were: what proportion of current AFP staff have been diagnosed or self-identify as autistic, dyslexic or as having ADHD? What are current non-autistic AFP employees' attitudes towards autistic people in the workplace? What are the particular barriers and facilitators for autistic people in the AFP workplace? And how can hiring and work practices be improved to be more inclusive for autistic staff? This slide outlines the steps we took in the various phases of the study. After designing the study protocol and obtaining ethics approval, with the support of Lauren, a survey was distributed throughout the AFP via internal email. Autistic staff members were also invited to participate in follow-up interviews. Once the data was collected, the research team analysed the survey and interview data before presenting the findings to 2 focus groups consisting of representatives from key areas of the AFP. In terms of measures, for the survey, we collected demographics and relevant background information, including age, gender, role within the AFP, years of service, and any personal connection they might have to autism. We asked about previous diagnoses of autism, ADHD, or dyslexia, and also whether they self-identify with any of these conditions. All survey participants completed the Autism Quotient short form, a screening scale for ADHD, and the adult dyslexia checklist. For neurodivergent staff only, we asked whether they'd ever disclosed to management or colleagues and whether they perceived whether their autism, ADHD, or dyslexia had impacted on their role. For non-autistic staff only, we asked if they'd ever completed any autism training, and they completed the diagnosis subscale of the Autism, Stigma and Knowledge Questionnaire as a measure of general autism knowledge. There were 4 attitude measures. 3 subscales were from a general attitude to disability in the workplace questionnaire that we modified to refer to autistic people only. The negative perception subscale measures cognitive and affective reactions to working with autistic people. The willingness to accommodate scale measures attitudes towards making accommodations in the workplace. And the equal treatment scale measures attitudes towards treating autistic employees equally to employees without disability. All items are rated on a 7-point scale with high scores indicating more positive attitudes. We also included one additional question which asked whether they agreed with the AFP taking active steps to increase the number of autistic staff. The follow-up interviews with autistic staff consisted of a number of open-ended questions related to how they were recruited and onboarded into the AFP, their experiences working at the AFP, including whether they perceived that their autism had impacted them in any way, and any suggestions as to how the AFP might be better able to attract and support autistic people. So 722 AFP staff completed the survey. 55% were female, 44% male, and 1% identified as other. Age range was between 18 and 73. An average duration of employment with the AFP was around 11 years. 57% were in unsworn roles and 40% were in sworn roles. This pie chart shows the range of roles. Investigations and corporate support were the most common roles, but there was representation across the full range of job roles within the AFP. The first 2 lines of the table show the numbers and percentages of staff who reported being diagnosed or who self-identified as being autistic or as having ADHD or dyslexia. You can see that about 5% have either been diagnosed or self-identify as autistic, and a similar proportion as dyslexic, and about 10% as having ADHD. In total, 128 respondents, or 17% of the study sample, reported that they'd been diagnosed or self-identified as having one of these 3 forms of neurodivergence. Neurodivergent staff were asked if they thought that their role was impacted by their autism, ADHD, or dyslexia. The majority thought there was an impact. The impact was reported to be mostly negative, although there was some that reported that there were both positive and negative impacts. The majority, between 80 to 86%, had never disclosed to management, and about 2/3 had never disclosed to colleagues. The remaining survey items around staff attitudes pertain to autism only. In terms of relevant background of non-autistic staff, just over half had some kind of personal connection to autism, a family member, friend, or colleague. 18% had completed prior training on autism. The mean autism knowledge score was 13.7, and that was from a possible range of 3 to 17. And that indicated a reasonable level of general knowledge about autism amongst AFP staff. For the question that we posed that related to whether the AFP would benefit from increasing the number of autistic staff, just over 2/3, 69%, either somewhat or strongly agreed that the AFP would benefit. 27.3% were neutral, and just 3.2% disagree. These graphs show the spread of scores on each of the 3 subscales of the disability questionnaire. High scores indicated more positive attitudes, and you can see that all 3 are skewed to the right. If we use scores above the midpoint on each scale, which we've indicated there with an orange arrow, as an indicator of more positive attitudes. About 78% scored over the midpoint on the negative perception scale, 72% on the willingness to accommodate, and just over 90% on the equal treatment scale. We were also interested in whether attitudes were related to any of the background variables that we collected. This slide presents the results of a correlation analysis between the background variables, which are listed on the left-hand side, and the 4 attitude measures that we used. You can see that gender and sworn status are associated with scores on all 4 attitude measures. Specifically, female gender and unsworn status were associated with higher scores. Having a personal connection to autism was also associated with higher scores on all 4 measures. Younger age and lower years of service were associated with higher scores. Completion of prior professional development related to autism was associated with higher scores on the negative perception scale. Scores on the autism knowledge scale were not associated with any of our 4 attitude measures. We went on to conduct regression analyses with each of the 4 attitude measures. We created an agree, didn't agree variable for increasing autistic staff. Female gender and personal connection were the strongest predictors of agreeing with increasing staff in this model. For negative perceptions, female gender, having a personal connection to autism, and having completed autism training were the strongest predictors of positive attitudes. For the willingness to accommodate scale, younger age, female gender, and having a personal connection were the strongest predictors. And for equal treatment, younger age, being an unsworn member, female gender, and personal connection were all unique predictors of positive attitudes. Overall, the most consistent unique predictors for positive attitudes across the 4 measures were female gender and having a personal connection to autism. 12 staff members, 7 male and 5 female, participated in our follow-up interviews. 3 had been formally diagnosed with autism and 9 self-identified as autistic. All 12 scored over the cutoff on the autism quotient. 4 were in sworn roles and 8 were in unsworn roles. During interview, we first explored their perceptions of how autism impacted them in their role. Some of the positive aspects included superior pattern recognition, memory skills, persistence with tasks, an analytical and logical approach to problem solving, high levels of concentration and focus and creative thinking. Some of the negative aspects included feeling like they didn't fit in, either in the work environment or in some of the social situations related to their work, believing that they were disadvantaged in their careers because they didn't exemplify what is broadly considered to be a typical COL. Social challenges that caused issues at work, including difficulty reading social cues and dealing with grey areas, particularly in relation to decisions around discretion in policing, and having a different communication style that could lead to them being misperceived by senior staff and colleagues as perhaps disinterested, rude, or as lacking capability. From the descriptions provided by the interviewees, a number of organisational factors were identified as impacting the experiences of autistic staff at the AFP. In terms of facilitators, provision of minor accommodations and flexibility, such as communicating via email rather than face-to-face meetings, having supportive colleagues who were happy to make accommodations when it was requested, and who appreciated the autistic person for who they were and what they brought to the team. Interviews that were more focused on demonstrating specific competencies for the role were identified as helpful. In terms of the barriers, the most frequent reference pertained to the lack of awareness of autism, particularly amongst the senior staff and staff providing psychological services. Although a number of interviewees indicated that there had been a positive shift in recent times, in terms of cultural change in relation to mental health and also diversity in general, most considered that the understanding of autism remained fairly limited. A number of interviewees mentioned inaccurate perceptions of autism as a mental health condition that needed to be treated, as an example of a lack of awareness. Some described experiences of bullying by team leaders and expressed disappointment in the way it was managed. There was a general reluctance to report instances of bullying as it would be viewed as somehow rattling the cage, with little change occurring as a result. All of the interviewees made some reference to the way staffing decisions are sometimes made within the AFP and the lack of consideration of a person's particular strengths or interests in many of the decisions that are made around team or role allocation. Some did say that there were occasions when an individual's performance or capabilities does seem to be considered. However, it seemed in those cases to be more about areas they were unsuited to rather than those where they may have had the most to offer.
So once we received the interim survey results, we conducted 2 focus groups with 23 AFP staff from a range of operational and support areas, but also a mixture of ranks. But what was really important to me was that we had representation of diagnosed or self-identified autistic AFP staff members, or those with ADHD, dyslexia, or other neurodivergent conditions. It's really important for me that they were having a voice from the start to influence the discussions, have a say, and advocate for positive change. We had 3 broad themes as the outcomes, being recruitment, training and education, culture and policy. Recruitment, AFP have fairly traditional practices and have been struggling more recently in our technical areas. So we're looking at opportunities for a new approach to recruitment and really targeting neurodivergent people with the right skills and talents and interests to come into the AFP, into those highly technical areas, but also more broadly into the AFP as well. Training and education, we already have a frontline training program for our sworn members, but expanding that and looking at it internally, how do we support our staff? How do we upskill ourselves to understand neurodiversity and get the best from our staff and support them the way they need? And then culture and policy. Culture being the largest, not a problem, but the largest opportunity for the AFP to really change, and training, education and recruitment will help achieve sustainable cultural change that we need in order to thrive. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed our presentation today. For more information, please contact Vicki Gibbs at the email address on the screen. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Professor Adam Guastella and I'm a clinical psychologist and director of the CAN research team at the University of Sydney. Today I'm going to talk to you about Switched On. Switched On is an end-to-end supported workplace program for autistic adults and for employers. It's the first end-to-end program that I'm aware of that provides supports for both the individual and workplaces so that individuals not only get jobs but they can stay in their roles. The program we've developed has been conducted over many years, and it's been in partnership with Macquarie University, EY and Aspect, who have all been wonderful collaborators to get us to this point. So I'm just going to briefly introduce the CAN research team at the University of Sydney. Now our team conducts research from infancy all the way into older adulthood, and we've got a range of studies looking at ways to improve assessments for people on the spectrum and those with other neurodevelopmental conditions, as well as developing evidence for interventions and supports that actually work, so that when people have a need, they can make the choice that best informs them about whether they should use that or not. We already know that people on the spectrum obviously want to work. They have a strong desire to contribute and to be paid for their services, and to fulfill roles that are meaningful, just like everyone else. Despite that, people on the spectrum are horrendously unemployed. Globally, it's estimated that about 80% of people on the spectrum are unemployed. And in Australia, it's about 42%. And of that 42%, a huge number are underemployed. That is, they're overqualified for their positions and they're not being promoted at the same rate as other people, and they're often not getting into managerial roles despite their experience. So for the individual, there can be a number of barriers that make it really hard for people on the spectrum to get a job. And this is not an exhaustive list, but we've broken those barriers down in terms of the key ones that we've targeted with this program. The first is mental health. Now, we've shown in a study last year that mental health in terms of anxiety and depression goes on to predict workplace confidence and perceptions of their own ability in relation to co-workers, in relation to managers. And so it goes on to say that if people are experiencing lots of anxiety and depression in their lives generally, they're going to need more support to manage their own interactions in the workplace. Secondly, there are really traditional recruitment practices that don't suit the needs of people on the spectrum. So, and we've found, and we're learning about these needs on a daily basis, actually. So, from the advertising process, you know, reading a set of criteria, having to sort of postulate what that criteria might mean in real concrete terms, and then being articulate to be able to write about yourself in a way which meets that criteria often doesn't suit the needs of people on the spectrum. The second part is the CV and how to sell yourself and build that CV, and having the know-how and the skills to be able to present your own experiences in a way which best matches the role that you're applying for. And then even if you submit an application and get an interview, having to go through that interview process. But even when we do get the job, then there are other barriers that come up in the process of maintaining that job. So the onboarding process often for employers is filled with lots of vernacular and statements that aren't necessarily entirely clear. There are lots of assumptions about the workplace that are made that often aren't necessarily explicitly stated to autistic people. And this can lead to a lot of confusion around expectations, responsibilities, what their roles are, and then what is, and I see this quite a lot, what is good performance and how do they know if they're performing well, and what are the expectations on a daily basis in relation to their role. And of course, we know that for employers, we often get contacted by employers with a strong desire to employ people on the spectrum, but a lack of know-how or the best ways or the realities of hiring people on the spectrum. So the first study that we did actually was we went into EY, and I have to say EY have been just an absolutely wonderful organisation to work with. They've got a strong desire to create inclusive workplaces and to promote the hiring of people with autism, but also other disabilities. But they really lack the know-how in general, like every organisation, in the best ways to do that. So we've partnered with them. And one of the first questions that we had is, well, you know, it's a fairly educated workforce at EY. And we would expect them to have a reasonable amount of knowledge about inclusive workplaces. So we were really interested to understand the attitudes of managers and co-workers in the workplace about autism, as well as other neurodevelopmental conditions, and also around that, how that knowledge might inform stigmatising attitudes that could have negatively affect the role of people in the workplace with autism. So we conducted a survey which went out to the entire workplace at EY, and that survey was, we were asking managers, co-workers, and also the HR team to complete about their knowledge about autism, about their you know, attitudes towards people on the spectrum, as well as knowledge about adaptations that might be needed for people on the spectrum. And the survey took about 20 minutes to complete, and we had a pretty good uptake actually of the Sydney office of about 55 people completing the survey. So the surveys that we conducted included 3 domains for the work I'll present today. One was about the knowledge of autism, and so we asked simple questions around how much they'd heard about autism, whether they'd worked with or had been had experiences of autistic people, and also just some general knowledge questions about, and often in those general knowledge questions we had some items in there that were you know, considered stigmatizing attitudes about contributions to autism, and those that might not you know, that might reflect more knowledge about the reality. We also conducted some assessments around how much people felt they could disclose their feelings and acceptance for outgroup members, and some interaction flexibility questions about their willingness to change practices for people on the spectrum. And so what we could generally get from these sets of measures was an assessment of knowledge and experiences of people with autism, and then alongside that, their willingness to work with and to hold flexible attitudes associated with changing workplace practices for people with autism. And so you can sort of get knowledge and stigmatizing attitudes out of both of those sets of measures. And what we found is we were really surprised. We didn't expect it because of the positive and the willingness of EY to work with us around developing a workplace program. But we found a lot of diverse attitudes in the workplace at different levels, and those attitudes, a lot of stereotypes, a lot of stigmatizing attitudes of lack of knowledge about autism and what people with autism were capable of. So that really surprised us that there was that diversity in an organisation which is highly educated and willing to engage in our workplace program. And what we found actually there was diversity in the sort of the surveys we got back, and for those managers that had poorer attitudes and more stigmatising attitudes towards people on the spectrum, that they also were the same people that had less experience of working or partnering or being with autistic people, and they also held these attitudes that it was going to cost a lot more to hire people on the spectrum, that there were certain roles built for people on the spectrum, and they showed a stronger desire to be sort of more separate to people on the spectrum. And so we had, this paper showed a really nice relationship actually between less knowledge about autism and more stigmatizing attitudes, which does reflect the broader literature about how people develop stigmatizing attitudes about out groups, but is a nice demonstration of that in operation in the workplace. And so what that led us to do was to develop an intervention program really to target some of those stigmatizing attitudes, and to improve knowledge about autism and also inclusive workplaces and disability practices in Australia. And we had a multi-set module training program over a couple of days, really targeting improving knowledge. And we've implemented that program, and we're just analysing the results to look at how it changed attitudes and knowledge, but I can say it certainly made a massive improvement in the reports around attitudes and knowledge about autism and reducing some of those stigmatising attitudes. And our next step with EY actually is to put this program into a space where that can be taken up by any organisation, and certainly nationally by EY, so that we can improve workplace attitudes for disability inclusion. So the next step really was to go and pilot our holistic program that provided different levels of support for the individual and for the workplace. And we think this is I haven't seen any other program that's been published that really does address both the needs of the individual and the workplace together, and takes the support as a journey experience from the advertising all the way through to managing the ongoing employment and problem solving on an ongoing basis to ensure sustained employment. And that's really what Switched On was. So there were managers, co-workers and HR members that were providing support for the workplace program, fully paid at a standard rate, and the EY staff all participated in our training programs that we conducted before taking on their role, either as a manager, a workplace buddy, a co-worker, or the HR consultant. At the same time, we also provided support to set candidates up in the right way. We gave them training in developing resumes, interview skills, managing workplace scenarios and problems that might arise for them, how to set goals and create structures, and requesting accommodations and the processes for requesting accommodations. And also we had throughout the entire program, the 12 weeks, was all about managing mental health and anxiety throughout. And we actually had an independent counsellor actually from Aspect to provide that extra support, so that wasn't part of our research team and it wasn't also part of EY. A big part at the start was setting up the job in the right way, so not only the hiring practices, but also making sure that the job matched the needs of the individual and the employer, so that the strengths were emphasised when placing people in roles. Now our goal really, and this is to be 100% clear, was not to choose the top 3% of employees and put them in a high-performing role. No, the goal was actually to take candidates that came along and identify their strengths and to develop a role flexibly with EY that really supported that person in their role. So it was a very different approach to trying to take a more inclusive approach. So in consultation with our team, EY also adapted their interviewing and onboarding processes as a way to better suit the needs of the individual, but also to going through this process, EY themselves were able to recognise limitations and some of the modifications they've taken on board, unsurprisingly, are now being used for every employee that come into EY. And it goes back to this idea that some of these modifications that benefit people on the spectrum benefit everyone. And some of those things are about modifying the interview questions, about how the interviews are done, whether people have to necessarily be overwhelmed with 6 people firing questions at them in the moment, or whether there's opportunities to change that process and to make sure the questions are really concrete and there's preparation time provided, and there's really the goal of an interview is to make sure that the person can express whether they have the skills and the knowledge to be able to meet the roles that are being advertised. So really improving that process, and that's so with every candidate that came through, we reviewed a lot of the hiring structures and provided advice to EY and with them and with their own autistic employees about how to change some of those interview processes. I'll be talking about it. We suggested many modifications during the onboarding process that either came from the autistic person themselves or other people with autism in EY. And we also did a lot of training around how to communicate and set expectations around the onboarding process. Simple things like, it's often assumed that people understand the structure and the hierarchical structure of a business, but often that has to be really explicitly stated, and what that means for the candidate when they're in a role in terms of how hierarchies operate and how work can be given to candidates. And throughout this entire process, we really aim to increase peer support, whether that's having a person at EY that they could go to if they had any questions, or a counsellor at EY, but also having that independent person that was separate to both the research group and the organisation. It was actually interesting, the completely independent person wasn't used to the degree that we assumed it would be. So I think it was an excellent support to have there, but not necessarily something that's used at a high rate. So some of the common accommodations and check-ins people had was about, changing the noise environment, using noise cancelling headphones, thinking about lighting and clothing preferences, whether there was any supportive software that could be implemented to support people on the spectrum. There's a lot of work around how instructions are provided and really trying to make sure that instructions were clear, direct, and there was a clear outcome that was understood by autistic people, that didn't necessarily lead to a lot of worry about performance. And there was, there's some unique features in EY about how they manage workflow, and that actually is quite confusing for everyone, including their current employees. And we did spend a lot of time rethinking about how workflow could be managed in a way which was associated with less uncertainty, if you like. And as I said, we provided weekly check-ins with the individual from the research group, from EY, and also with people that were independent. And occasionally there were some mental health things that, specialist support might have been where, someone like myself or a clinical psychologist might have gotten involved to sort of think about how best to manage these issues. And part of the reason we were doing that is that we're aiming to provide SOPs and structures that can then be provided to businesses in the future about, when these sorts of things happen, these are the sorts of responses that you can have. So just to recap, our 12-week program was a paid employment program. EY paid for these jobs in the same way as they pay for any other staff member and at the same rate. The candidates got to choose whether the jobs were full-time or part-time based on their needs, and often there was an escalating period of time, so it might have started off as part-time and then moved to full-time towards the end. Every single person that started the role was able to complete the role, and in fact we even had some unfortunate success stories where people were given the training programs and some resources to help them get a job, and they didn't necessarily go with the job at EY. They chose a job elsewhere that they used the resources to get that job. So there was examples of autistic people actually taking the resources and using it in other environments successfully. So everyone who started the program completed it. 75% remained in employment with EY after the internship program completed, and for the 25% that didn't, it wasn't necessarily about the performance of the candidate. In all cases except one, it was about the right position for that person not being available at that time, but there being a sort of a desire from the organisation that once a role like that was available to hire that person. So we'd expect the vast majority of people in the program to remain in employment with EY. Our experiences, which I'll report, were that autistic candidates reported very high levels of job satisfaction. It wasn't without issues, and we had some great feedback from our autistic candidates, but overall we had really positive feedback about both EY and their accommodations and supports, as well as the entire experience of having a job. And from our end, the program itself and how it supported them in the role. And I can't tell you, we had many candidates that had applied for hundreds of jobs, had been underemployed in lots of different roles or not employed before. And to come into this and to see their confidence really increase over the course of the internship was one of the best outcomes of our program. And I'll just go through some of these. Aren't necessarily, these are just some of the random pieces of feedback we got. But this candidate indicated he had such an amazing experience during the program. They discovered much about themselves and gained lots of confidence. They were faced with many challenges and they learned how to persevere, but also ask for help and to get change. When they were offered a role in a different team, they were overjoyed, and now they're loving working at EY. Couldn't be happier. Another candidate writes, previously I had lots of difficulty getting work. I just didn't get past the interview or probation period. I joined the program because I was looking for support and advice on how I could manage difficult situations and find permanent work. The skills sessions were really helpful. I learned more about different types of interview questions and how to ask for reasonable accommodations from employers. I usually have problems answering interview questions, but this time the interviewers were very patient. They gave me prompts and more time than usual to answer questions. I've enjoyed having the flexibility to work from home, as it can be exhausting travelling into the office every day, and the workplace can also be quite fast-paced, but I've received some accommodations and support to help me adapt. Placing people in Sydney was a pilot program, and what we're most excited about now are next steps to make this national. So what we're setting up right now is an employment hub at USyd, which provides training and support for both the individual and for employers to learn how to provide support to autistic people in the workplace. And so there's going to be a whole range of online training programs available at USyd for all employers and for people wanting work, the individuals wanting work, and we'd like to make that accredited. We're also working with EY to create an incubator program, and this really reflects their desire to do good as a social enterprise for other businesses. So the aim really is to put autistic people into roles for a period of say 12 weeks, and then following that training period and skill development period of 12 weeks to place them in roles with other organisations in both urban and rural areas across Australia. I'd like to thank the research staff, Lorna Hankin, Elizabeth Stratton, and also the senior team, Vicki Gibbs from Aspect, Nick Lozier from USyd, Elizabeth Palicano, sort of at Macquarie University, and also my CAN research team, who are all been really wonderful in delivering the program and persistent. We've had a lot of challenges along the way with COVID, with different organisations and the NDIS to deliver this, but we're really proud that we were able to get to this point to have what I think is a really great research output. And yeah, please contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I'll ask our panelists to turn their cameras on, and I think we have some fantastic questions to go through. The first one that I'll go through, I think, was a question for you, Lauren. So if we can get you off mute, we'll be able to hear you. You seem to have got some wonderful data from your project, and somebody was just wondering what's happened post-survey. Have you been able to make any progress after the research has been completed?
Yes, can you hear me? Yep, great. Yeah, look, we've been working tirelessly, to be honest, since the survey was provided to the AFP. It was presented at a diversity council, which made it all the way up to the commissioner. The overall response to it was extremely exciting. There's been a lot of support internally from executives. In terms of what's happened since the survey was delivered, was we've provided training from Mary Mead. They came and provided a session on autism to some of our more specialist areas in our cyber capability areas. That was, I guess, a test just to see the content of the presentation and how that was received, with the intention in May of having an AFP-wide presentation delivered by them as well. So that's set for May. I've provided neurodiversity presentations to internal teams. They've been reaching in after the survey to sort of ask how they can incorporate the concept of neurodiversity into the work that they do. So I talk about autism, but also ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions. So I've delivered 4 of those to date, and I've got another 2 booked in after the school holidays. So very exciting. And that's all around sort of management ideas and recognising and supporting our members. What else has happened? We've developed a hub page. So we have an internal intranet. So that should be launched at the end of the month, which will have links to Aspect Research, to Mary Mead, to a whole range of organisations externally for members to go for support, and also internally to our welfare networks. And we have a AAA network for all abilities. So that'll be linked there. And the survey is going to be published on that, and then that will be available to all of our staff. So that should be really interesting to see the feedback on that. We also have booked in for June a presentation by a UK Detective Inspector, Warren Hines from Midlands Police, who's autistic. He's going to deliver us a half-an-hour presentation on his career and how autism has been an advantage for him in a sworn role. So that's how we're going to move and change attitudes around sworn members being autistic. He solved over 90 homicides and attributes that success to his autism. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's going to do wonders for us. There's a whole bunch of next steps, which I guess are finite, such as setting up the project team permanently within our diversity and inclusion structure. That's currently just myself and 2 others, but we're hoping to set that up formally. And yeah, education, developing potentially policies and inbuilding anything we need to in our reasonable adjustments, better practice guide. Yeah, I think that's it so far. So it's a movable feast. It's a work in progress, but all I can really say is that the uptake from the AFP has been sensational and it's ongoing.
Fantastic. I don't know if you can hear a police car going past my house as we speak. I'm not sure it's linked. I've got a couple of questions now just for you, Adam, as well, around your work. The first question was, I guess, around, work as a mainstream construct. Is that sort of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, come to an office kind of vibe? Have you talked about, explored other models of employment, self-employment, specialist freelance kind of work, adaptations to that sort of regular model?
Yeah, it's a good point, Tom. And actually, there was a long discussion about it during COVID when, we changed from largely having a society where people went into work to largely working from home and having a lot more flexibility about work. I think that, this was initially a pilot program working closely with an organisation to establish inclusive practices for their workplace. But I think there are lots of adaptations that will be part of the next steps. And there's no doubt that flexible workplaces and also the idea of helping autistic people to have their own businesses they're both really important areas for future research and practice.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. The last question I have just for today before we move on was a question from Emma Goodall, just asking whether attitudes and understanding towards autism change in relation to the kind of job that the person is being employed to do. Did you have any data on that?
No, I mean, not specifically. Most of all the comparisons we made were based on the employer filling out the form. So yeah, we can certainly have a look at that, and certainly in our post data collection. I saw there was another question about the publications that are coming from this, where this information will be.
Yep.
We've got a couple of publications that are either under review or about to be submitted. We've got some baseline stuff looking at mental health and employment that's already published, but a lot of this EY work is currently under review or about to be submitted. So I can provide the publications when they come out to people, and some of that stuff will be in there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adam. That's great. I just wanted to thank our presenters. It's really fantastic to hear from you all. We'll just move on from the Q&A just to wrap up. If you are interested in hearing a little more from Adam, I knew you get around a lot, Adam, but also Stephanie from Aspects Employment Service. On the 3rd of May, there's a new podcast in our Different Brilliant series, specifically looking at transitioning to employment. So I think it'll be really interesting to hear both perspectives. So again, thank you, Adam, for that.
Just one other thing, I noticed a couple of comments. I'd just like to also, I didn't articulate it in the presentation, but a lot of the people that were in our inclusive program, they've now joined the research team to expand the program and to act as community members and research staff. And I should say EY also hire autistic people separate and had people employed in their workplace and representing the inclusive workplace practices, and they work partnered with us throughout the entire program, just to make that 100% clear.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. Okay. Just to let you know, ARCAP's next webinar is on Thursday, the 28th of July at 3:30, with a focus on translating autism research to practice in education. So we've got a couple of presentations, one around individual planning and another one about sex education practices for autistic students. Please do join me in thanking today's presenters via the chat function. It was great to hear you. Thank you, Lauren, Vicki, again, and Adam. It's really important, I guess, that research continues to inspire the sorts of changes that I hope you guys are making in workplaces. It's really great to hear. This is exactly what Aspects Research Centre is all about, this kind of practice-based research. So thank you so much again for your time and for your efforts, and we look forward to following your work closely. Thanks to everybody for joining the presentation. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you all again in the next webinar.